to come on my podcast? Because I am so fascinated with just you and what you talk about. So let's welcome for the first time on the Craftsman Online podcast. We're just going to go by his Instagram handle, which I love. Brother Metal Drew. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Hey there, Internet. It's your favorite New Jersey Freemason, Metal Drew here. And Brother Aker over here is giving me more imposter syndrome.
No, this is awesome. And it's funny because, you find Masonic brothers all over the world. I have a list, I'm sure you do too, now of brothers that are very close friends of mine who I've met post-COVID that I probably would have never interacted with, who I've never met in real life. And now I can add Metal Drew to that list.
I mean, at least we're somewhat closer. We're both East Coast guys, so there's only hours separating us. Whereas I know a brother over in New Zealand where I've got to pay, a couple fees to go fly a plane to go see him.
Right. Yeah. So I discovered you on Instagram. You did one of the things I've never done, which is stitched into another video of somebody making a comment about something that had to do with Freemasonry. Yes. And you're kind of the biggest advocate of, just setting it straight when it comes to the fact versus fiction that happens a lot. So not only do you dive into all areas of Freemasonry, education, history, Masonic lore, but you also don't hold back with your opinions. So tell us how you became Metal Drew and how you also became our favorite New Jersey Freemason.
Well, the name Metal Drew, like we talked about in the green room, I've had that moniker for 20 plus years now. That goes back to an old joke between me and my non-Mason friends, because I came up with the whole new wave of American heavy metal scene, Lamb of God, Killswitch Engaged, all that early 2000s metal. And my friend was a big emo kid with Brand New, Thursday, and all the emo bands, Fall Out Boy, that era. So we had the joke of metal versus emo. So they called me Metal Drew. Freemasonry, my journey started in 2016. I'm actually a relatively young Mason in terms of that. Past master my lodge, all that fun stuff. But the more I delve into Freemasonry and the actual history of it, the more I kind of get irked by stories that are told about Freemasonry, not just from the naysayers and the anti-Masons, but some of these stories that brothers pass along. And I'm like, no, that's not real. That didn't happen. So I decided, I'm like, you know what? I actually found a couple guys on TikTok because, like most of us, we joined TikTok during COVID because we wanted to interact somehow. So I found a couple of Masonic creators on there. And I'm like, you know what? I could do this too. I could bring my flavor of New Jersey Freemasonry to whoever wants to hear it. And I guess some people subscribe to my, can we curse on this show?
You can.
Okay. My
I can't wait till you hear the
my particular brand of bullshit.
Nice. I always tell guys, you can say whatever you want. We do produce the show. So when the playback happens, you're going to really enjoy the sound effect that gets inserted for that one. And everybody will know what you said. So very nice. Oh, okay. I'll just hang out. We are experiencing technical difficulties. I think there's a couple reasons why this might happen. Oh, Andrew's back. Put a pin in that one in case we lose Andrew. We were experiencing technical difficulties.
Maybe you see me again?
Yeah.
Am I back?
You're back. I have a theory on why this happened.
This is what happened. You know what it is? That was the Illuminati. The Illuminati's coming after me, and they're killing my signal. That's what it is.
That was my second idea on the theory. So I'm curious, with all of the stuff that's out there about Freemasonry, what are the ones that kind of trigger you the most, that you're like, you know what, I got to go put on my super, worshipful brother Metal Drew cape and go out here and start righting these wrongs and setting these people straight?
So for me, it's all of the stuff. There's two actually that really get to me. It's obviously the Taxel hoax stuff. which is, for those who don't know, Leo Taxil was an author from the 1890s. He was a French author who wanted to get under the skin of not only the Freemasons, but the Roman Catholic Church, because he had a big beef with them. So he decided to write this series of little tracts about how the Freemasons do this horrible stuff. He created all these characters and all these just ridiculous claims about the Freemasons, to the point where guys like A.E. Waite and other Masons at the time were like, what are you talking about? But the Catholic Church, obviously against us at the time, were just eating it up like candy. So, they fall for that. There is, and the second thing, obviously, is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the big anti-Semitic work, the forgery that came out of Russia in 1930-ish, around that time. And we are mentioned heavily with the rest of the anti-Semitic literature, specifically in Protocol 15, because according to this fake document, the Jews control us and use us to control the governments and everything else.
Okay. I know we're going to get into the metal album history part of it and really break but this really fascinates me because, first of all, you're a pretty young guy, as you pointed out. How did you find these areas, and how did they start to speak to you that you're like, I got to be the one that sets the record straight on this?
Actually, that's kind of a straight line for me. I grew up Roman Catholic. I have since deconstructed from that belief system. I have my own beliefs about deity and whatnot, but from that specific belief system, I've separated myself. And I work in a town that is primarily Orthodox Jewish. So just being around the people, you hear stories and you hear stereotypes. And I'm like, if I'm going to be an idiot and an asshole to people, I want to know where it comes from without being just a blatant, ignorant fool. I want to know, as much as that it sounds harmful, but I want to know why the words exist, where they come from. Why are you being called this? Like, why does this stereotype exist? Like, of course, there's the funny stereotypes out there that we all can joke about, but like, where do these real, more malicious stereotypes come from? What did this, derive from? Like, a very negative term for the Jewish people is a word that starts with K. I won't repeat it. I'll try to be a little bit more correct. That comes from, I believe it's the Yiddish or Hebrew word for circle. And it's because, at least according to legend, that when they came over to Ellis Island, they would all write circles for their names. And then the officers at Ellis Island were just calling them that because everyone was using that word, or everyone was using it.
Interesting.
So it's just, I guess you could call it a morbid curiosity of like, where does this come from? Why do we hate each other? Why do we separate each other? And does it actually merit any type of actual anger or malice toward another group? Like, does this have any bearing besides just blatant ignorance?
One more question, then I promise we'll get into the
go, dude.
The metal talk. Because obviously, and I find that you're really speaking out, and we talk about like, oh, you're defending the community. No, you really are defending your community. Like, that's what I love about you taking these stances. How do you measure your response? Because that's one thing I've been very impressed about, is that it's very easy to go over the line. Yeah.
There's multiple takes.
But like, what Masonic lessons, or we always point to like the working tools or Masonic virtues, what goes off in your head before the words officially become official and out there in social media?
I mean, the point within a circle, circumscribe your desire, that whole thing obviously is a big, just in general, that should just be a baseline for any Mason getting on any type of social media regarding any topic. You really got to pay attention to what you say to another Mason, number one, in public, because there are certain Masons out there that will say things on public forums, be it video or a text, that you have to go, dude, what the hell are you talking about? Like, why did you say that? That's like, never mind not being Masonic. That's just blatant BS.
Yeah.
But for me personally, it comes down to, I want to get it right. I accept criticism. Like if someone were to come to me and tell me, hey, you got this fact wrong, I'm not going to deny them unless I have another book of proof or body of work that says, nah, here it is. You know, I'm not the brightest guy. I'm not some PhD in this stuff. This is just stuff that I read because the older I get physically, the more it's just like I'm just on a path of knowledge. So I want to share that knowledge with everyone else. And like I harken back to, it does take multiple takes for me to calm down, because the New Jersey in me just wants to, start flipping the bird and calling them names and saying you're an idiot and all this other stuff. Actually, to jump off of that, there's another creator on TikTok who is not a Mason. He is a physical Mason, though. He actually works with stone, that I'll shout out. His name is Tiger Mom on TikTok. And he and I are actually the ones that go back and forth and will say, hey, you can't say that. It looks bad. You got to work around it. You can't just call people assholes. Maybe you call them potholes, because they're the speed bumps of life. Nice. Things like that.
Very nice. Yeah, I don't even want to put this out there because it's like I'm just inviting it if I say it out loud. But I have never run into any of this before. And you remind me of a very dear friend and brother here in the DC area that folks in the Scottish Rite Southern Masonic jurisdiction would be familiar with, Maynard Edwards. He is also a podcast host as well. And he is like out there with you, man. He loves putting down the conspiracy people. He likes getting them right back into their place, just shooting down all the stuff that's out there, to the point where I've been in a recording on his podcast, and he's like, hang on a second. And I can hear his keyboard. I'm like, what are you doing? I don't even think there's any keys.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, totally. There are no keys left in that clip, my guy. Like,
well,
geez.
You gotta send me this guy's information. Maybe we can talk over a pizza, eh?
Yeah. All right. So to the whole point of why you're here is this has been a podcast idea that has been kind of cooking in my head, for at least 8 years. And just this little conversation I've had with you has really kind of reinforced, like, man, it's so weird just how the universe works at times. So one of my dear friend and brothers from my mother lodge, I was the senior deacon. He was the junior warden. We were starting to go through the chairs together. Brother Eric, and he was really, really he was a metalhead, to the point where if I joked with him about having a mullet at some point in his life, he was offended. Since this is a podcast, let him down. Had it back in a ponytail. It's there now. And also, like you, Eric, very Italian, very Italian-American, very proud. So also a quiet little wallflower that never let you know where he felt on things.
In New York.
Yeah. So one of the things that he would do is when we would have conversations about esoteric Freemasonry, and the early ones that we had would all come back to 80s and 90s heavy metal, or hard rock, as I would call them, albums. And one that he would point to, the first one, was Iron Maiden. Like, he made a comment about one of their albums. And I was like, what are you talking? They were Freemasons? He's like, no, on their album. And then I, of course, don't know. So I had to look this up as preparation for this episode. But he was talking about Power Slave, the 1984 big hit for them. What I do remember him talking about was all of this.
It's back there on the wall. It's my favorite Maiden album, actually.
Right next to the wedding photo.
Of course. Please.
So what was it about that album? Was it all of the symbols that was in the music, or the symbols in the artwork that kind of drew you to him? So,
like Eric said, they're not Freemasons. None of those guys, although I'd love to see Bruce Dickinson in Lodge one day. That would be amazing. None of those guys are Masons. And I think it just correlates with the symbolism on the album cover. Actually, if you don't mind.
Yeah, get it. He's physically running back to the wall and getting his out of the, there it is, dusting off the jacket even.
Power Slave. So for the viewers that are actually seeing this on video, the cover is of a pyramid with obviously Iron Maiden's mascot Eddie at the center, dressed up as a pharaoh, with other Egyptian iconography all around it. Sphinxes, that's Anubis. with a trail. It looks like a burial, a funeral rite going up the stairs. There's a snake over the head with some spread eagles and stuff like that. So I think it's just just kind of a classical connection, because there are definitely the esoteric Masons out there that follow Manly P. Hall and Count Cagliostro with the sort of Egyptian rite style of Freemasonry. If you were to look close at the cover of Power Slave, there is no all-seeing eye. It's just the top of the pyramid lit up. Like a lot of people like to, like at the back of the dollar bill, for instance, like it's obviously separated from the top of the pyramid. You have the Eye of Providence above it. On this cover, it's just the top of the pyramid. And the song, obviously, Power Slave itself has references to like gaining mystical power and, touching into other planes of existence and things like that. So it's kind of just one of those things that I think some of the more esoterically minded Masons love to grab at and say that, hey, they've got similar ideas. I don't.
How old were you when you first heard that?
Go ahead.
How old were you when you first heard that album, or their music? I guess
Maiden for me was probably 98 when I was in Catholic school.
Nice.
That was actually some of the things that you had listed on your little email when we were going back and forth. A lot of that music is like, that was middle school for me.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get a base of like, I don't think I had those kind of thoughts when I was in middle school. I remember stumbling into my parents' record collections, and they were, kids of Southern California in like the 60s and 70s. So it was a lot of Beatles, Fleetwood Mac, Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, I was going to say, so an interesting, like even Led Zeppelin was at Led Zeppelin 3. The cover is the Hermit. It's a tarot card. So an esoterically minded individual, especially with how Jimmy Page he was part of the OTO and all this other stuff, like they could get a stronger connection from something like that and have more substance behind it because of the connections of Jimmy Page, the OTO, the tarot card being created by A.E. Waite, at least that specific image. I think they would have more of a build than they would at least the cover of Power Slave.
Oh, so here's what's beautiful about this. So I remember looking at that Led Zeppelin album the first time and being like, oh, cool. A guy with sticks on his back. I guess that's interesting. The first time I saw an Iron Maiden album, I looked at it and I was like, what the hell is this? And then hearing their music, I was like, I just kind of associated that with guys in high school that wore G jackets, hated their dads, and smoked Marlboro Reds in the parking lot, before school. I didn't know they were like this deep when it came to their. I mean, I grew up listening to country music in southwestern Arizona, so hearing Iron Maiden blasting out of somebody's Dodge Ram truck would have been like, what the hell is up with that guy?
Music. It's the music of rebellion. It's the music, for me at least, it was the music of my teenage years of just being loud and obnoxious in that way. But I didn't have parents that thought of it that way. Hell, my mother used to sing System of a Down when I would play their stuff. So like I can't say that I was that kid, but I know where it comes from. Like I understand that angsty rebel attitude. And then you have a character like Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer of Maiden, who's almost an Olympic level fencer. He flies airplanes. The man literally sang cancer out of his throat a couple years ago. Like, wow, it's just an amazing individual, and I'd love to meet the man personally.
So while doing research for this podcast, because admittingly was not into heavy metal or hard rock growing up, I'm embarrassed to admit, like, I would have been the guy that liked Bon Jovi, Aerosmith.
That's my wife.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we both sit to pee. So I discovered the artist Derek Riggs, and there's a really cool book, and I'll make sure it's in the notes for this episode. And he's actually the person behind designing all of the Iron Maiden albums. What do you know about Derek, or what do you know about his artwork, or how has it spoken over the years?
So honestly, until you sent me that email, I did not know who the artist was at all. I had to look him up myself, and looking through his artwork, he is very much the prototypical 80s, I don't want to call it esoteric, but like almost like horror artwork. Obviously Maiden was a big thing when he was doing his art, but like he also has other bands. He did artwork for book covers, just general, like, it's not like Cannibal Corpse offensive art, but it's art out there that like you'd see on like iRobot, like Asimov stuff, like Isaac Asimov stuff, like kind of sci-fi-ish type of genre in a way, not the overly offensive, blood dripping, zombie type stuff. So
yeah,
yes, he probably incorporated kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of theme to it, and maybe the satanic panic of the 80s just fed in and took that artwork and took all the other artwork and just blew it out of proportion when compared to the Faces of Death videos that were circulated in the 90s. If anyone remembers that reference, it was nothing.
Jeez. Well, what a perfect lead in, because this next guy, I vividly remember him. His album dropped my senior year of high school. And I remember, riding around with a friend that was really into Marilyn Manson. And I'm like, what is up? So the album is Antichrist Superstar. And I had to really look at the cover of this as doing the research for this episode about the use of the square and compass that the band had out when they were promoting this album. And then there's also a bunch of rumors about Marilyn Manson secretly being a Freemason. What light can you shed on any of this? You're shaking your head. Okay, so
yeah,
what can you tell us, Drew?
Jeremy is not a Freemason by any stretch of the imagination. But take it in this way: he's at least he tried to be the new age Alice Cooper. He was a shock rocker. He still is a shock rocker. He's vividly putting out these images of anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, anti-religion, anti-authority, stuff like that. Even his one song that he came out with, so it would be your senior year of high school, it'd be my sophomore year of high school, when he came out with Dope Show, where he was wearing the all-white suit with the breasts and the androgynous look. He's pushing boundaries, and I don't want to defend him because I'm not a fan, especially as I get older and I see some of the stuff that he did in his more private life and the abuse charges that he's had and things like that. He absolutely was just trying to push limits and gain that following of, again, that angsty teen, the one that wanted to get away from the parents, that was being suppressed by maybe the Midwestern Bible Belt style leadership that they were seeing around them. And he wanted to reach out and tell them, like, no, there's other things out there. May not be as crazy as my music, but there's other paths out there. I do believe he was part of Thelema, though.
I have no idea what that is. Is this some sort of secret society?
This is Aleister Crowley stuff.
Okay. Still lost. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's so it's the more esoterically minded, like, stuff that Aleister Crowley tried to do in the early 90s, the real, like, do what thou wilt style stuff, the stuff that more stuff that really comes back negatively against Freemasonry.
Okay.
That they try to associate us with, that because we are secretive, we don't want to get into. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be very straight about this one. I had never even heard of this band.
His name's not Jeremy. His name's Brian. Brian Warner. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Don't
you
could
have told me the only one I know is Jack Smith that is an actual Freemason, and I was blown away when I saw him being a Freemason. I'm like, really? I'm like, Brad Paisley, I buy that. Jack White is a Freemason? Yep. I never even, wow.
Jack White actually helped save the temple. What state is that? I want to say Ohio. I
Mm.
can't remember what temple it was, but it was one of like the Grand Lodge, a huge Masonic room. He bought it and brought them out of like bankruptcy. And
Yep.
yeah, Jack White. My favorite one is the keyboardist from Yes,
Okay.
Alan Wakeman. He is a past
I know the
master.
band. Okay.
Yeah, the
Really?
keyboardist. Yeah, he's a past master over in England. According to my research, there is a lodge in England that specifies that you have to make your money in order to be a member of this lodge, specific lodge. You have to make your money in entertainment, so music, performing arts, things like that. If you go back a couple years ago, Netflix had that series called Inside the Freemasons. It was
Mm-hmm.
primarily United Grand Lodge stuff. He's on there, and there is a gentleman who was going through his fellowcraft degree who was a rapper. And and that's where they talked about like
Okay.
that specific lodge, not Freemasonry in general, just that specific lodge. You had to
Yeah.
make your money in entertainment somehow, and that's how you became a member of that lodge.
Yeah, we have those affinity style lodges here in DC where you're either a military member or you
Right.
speak Italian, French, and then there's also the performers lodge, or you are a member of this college fraternity or whatnot. And it's always been interesting to me because, as we talk about the larger issues that Masonry has with membership and retention, and now you're adding on this extra caveat, like, oh, by the way, this isn't open to everybody. This is really just the few of the few. It's like, okay, interesting.
Well, I mean, so I mean, in that respect, I would go out on a limb and say the individual would have to join a traditional, quote unquote, Blue Lodge,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there, almost like an appendant body, at least here in America, they could do one of these affinity lodges, these more specialized lodges, kind of like AMD, where they have the one degree system where it's all operative Masons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you could have a D&D Mason group or a comic book lodge where, yes, of course you pay the dues, you get your proper charter, things like that, but then your talks and everything else will center around a specific subject, and maybe you could grow from that. You could actually do what all the conspiracy theorists say and get together and actually form these more business oriented or story building clubs and create something else out of it.
Well, just from this conversation tonight, I think a metal lodge would be pretty sweet. I mean, I would just go to attend as a visitor just to hear the discussions and the programs and the presentations.
Just wait until you hear the music for the opening.
So I got invented headphones. So this next band, I'll be honest, I have never even heard of them. I've never even heard of their music. I was a freshman in high school in 1992, and Ministry was nowhere near my radar. Yeah. Neither is the album Psalm 69, which I always find that so interesting. Why metal bands choose like biblical passages or books of the Bible, or they specifically go after biblical figures to make that part of their thing. But what they did was put out this album, and you can talk about it. All of the Masonic symbols that most of us recognize are right on the cover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm looking at it right now. Of course, it's also got razors and clocks and an angel and a whole like the dice and everything, and that just fits with, I mean, listen, the band is named Ministry. What do you think they're going to talk about? What do you think?
I would think they were like a Christian rock band, even more so than, what was the name of the band from the 80s that like dressed up as bees and ran around on stage with the Striper? Was that?
Yeah, Striper. Yes. Yeah. Striper. Or the modern day would be Skillet.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ministry sounds more like in the vein of being like a Christian rock band than like a heavy metal group.
And again, that goes back to that whole irony and just what metal as a genre was about. Metal as a genre came out of like the punk movement, came out of that anti-authoritarian movement. So they wanted to get away from their oppressive family, their oppressive jobs, government, things like that, and they wanted to cause this noise and they wanted to get things off their chest. Punk did 3-chord rock and yelled about it. Metal just at the time, like Ozzy and Maiden, and some might say Led Zeppelin, that's up for debate. Personally, I don't. But like they were anti-war, they were anti-establishment, they were, kind of hippie-ish with, so like for instance, Iron Maiden with a song like Sweet Leaf. It's about pot. you know. So it's again going back to that whole anti-establishment, authoritarian view. And of course, a band like Ministry, an industrial metal band, out of, you know, coming out of America, home of Jesus Christ, depending on who you talk to, of course they're going to make an album like this.
So I want to get to something that touches kind of the early chord that we were on with, like the work that you do, fighting the good fight on social media, TikTok and Instagram, and we'll make sure to get the handles so folks can follow Metal Drool on these social platforms. But the main gist of it is that there's no doubt when people want to try to make a statement, whether it's Marilyn Manson and using the square and compass to promote an album, or outwardly going out and including Masonic symbols or some of the words that people would know as Freemasonry, just to kind of benefit from a controversy or some of the conspiracy theories that surround our craft. What do you think? Is there any merit to these claims that people are using us to promote themselves? Or is this really just a product of maybe an overactive imagination where it's like, hey, this band was also influenced by the idea of an all-seeing eye? That is not necessarily a 100% Masonic symbol.
I think it's both. I think it leans more heavily toward the controversial side, because a lot of people obviously don't know about the Freemasons, whether that's good or bad. I mean, a couple of my coworkers don't even know who the Freemasons are. And then when I discuss, like, oh yeah, I'm this, that, and the other thing, they're like, oh, okay, cool. It's just it's a fraternity. That's where it ends, which is fine. I'll take that. You know, even if a detractor was to come out and say that it's an old man drinking club, I'll take that. Fine. I'll take that moniker. I don't care. But obviously you have out there, you have the more vivid imaginations that like to take symbols and use them for more devious means. For instance, the star for OES, the 5-pointed star, in that orientation, the star is pointed, people automatically say, oh, it's a pentagram. No, it's not. If you were to look at that symbol and research where that symbol comes from, it's a religious symbol as well. It's for the 5 wounds of Christ. And at least with OES, it's supposed to represent the 5 heroines of the Bible. Again, religious connotations to it, a more peaceful and more, I don't want to say acceptable, but a more rational belief to it. But you've got people like Marilyn Manson, like pretty much every death metal band ever, using it in the more satanic sense with the picture, like the death metal band Venom, where they have a pentagram and then they have a warped goat head for Baphomet in the middle of it. Blatant symbolism to show that they're singing about evil lyrics and things that the clutch my pearl Catholic Christians of America are going to revolt against and say that stuff is horrible. So yeah, I think, sure, there's artists out there that are going to use the symbol because they are associated with Freemasonry, or they want the more positive aspect of it, like Dream Theater. Dream Theater came out with a song called Rite of Passage. It is very blatantly about the initiatic experience of an individual. Nothing sinister about it. Like, you and I listen to it and we go, yeah, that's pretty much what happens. None of those guys are Masons. They just pretty much looked at it, saw that a bunch of fraternities and sororities and just various esoteric groups have an initiatory practice, and wrote about the most famous one, which would be us, the most notable one. Not saying that's a good thing all the time, but like the one that always comes to people's minds when you talk about initiation and secret societies, who's on their list first? I don't know, go talk to the Simpsons. Matt makes fun of us all the time. He made fun of us in his other show, Disenchanted, like the first main villain's wearing a Royal Arch apron. Like, so it really boils down to public perception. And that's another thing that I address on my various channels, is that within us, the Shriners have the best, most positive PR team. Like, everyone knows the Shriners parade. Everyone sees the funny little cars and the clowns and whatever else. They don't know
cute old men. Yeah.
They don't know that you have to be a Mason in order to even join that. You know, that
Some of the people that try to get into the Shriners don't even know that they have to be a Mason. And I'm like, wow, that is, talk about a cruel trick. Like, you got to do this before you can do this. I just want to drink beer and drive a little car and help out kids. Well, first you got to go through these 3 degrees. Have fun.
And that's another thing. Like, and that's something else that comes up on my TikTok channel is the lexicon of like, you got the 3rd degree. Oh, that's evil Mason talk. No, it's not. It's just something that came out of pop culture because at the time, a lot of people were Masons back in the day. So they referred to some act of getting a large diatribe of words getting the 3rd degree. When you got yelled at by your dad, you got the 3rd degree. Well, your dad probably got the 3rd degree in the Master Mason's Lodge and sat there for 30 minutes listening to that friggin' closing charge or whatever, you know?
Felt like the longest experience in your life.
I gotta go to the bathroom, I swear.
Well, what I found interesting is when I reached out to you to set up this podcast episode, and this has been so informative for me, like, and I hope for our listener that they've really dug it too. You said, you know what? No one's ever really approached me about this. And I'm like, how has time been allowed to slip and pass without anybody coming to you saying, hey, can we talk about some Masonic symbolism that exists in metal albums, covers work? So I'd like to do a little then and now about this. So you grew up as a kid of like the mid 90s or late 90s. I grew up as a kid in the 80s into the 90s. It's so interesting. Just a few years separate us, but yet so much different stuff was happening in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Then. So back then, when you were just, young little Drew going through middle school, first hearing these, well, I'm guessing they were on CD for you back then?
There were some that were still on tape, maybe, still on cassette,
okay.
Yeah, but CDs were definitely coming through prominently.
Okay. So the first time you were hearing Iron Maiden on a cassette tape in 7th grade, seeing that cassette tape, think about what that impression was like to Metal Drew now with, a wife and kid and past master of his lodge. And now when you hear the music or you see the symbolism, what goes through your mind? What happens then from now?
So I'll put this in almost a threefold way, specifically going to Iron Maiden. First hearing Iron Maiden was my uncles because they were young enough that was the new thing, what they were listening to. And that was the thing that they were pumping out of there because they grew up similar to you where it was Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Creedence Clearwater Revival, like that whole genre of stuff. So Maiden was like the extreme end for them, but they still really appreciated what it was. So it was like hanging out with my uncles, cool times, playing by the pool, and then starting to listen to the lyrics, and you're hearing, especially with Iron Maiden, very fantasy style stuff, wizards and dragons and stuff that Dio sang about. Then when I got to high school, my senior year, I had one English teacher who brought Iron Maiden to class because on that very album, on Power Slave, is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And that's what we were studying in class. And now it's not a direct translation of that poem, but it is Iron Maiden's interpretation of that poem that tells the exact same story. It does copy the one line, water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. But she had us analyze that song and then read the actual poem and compare the two and do a little workshop on that. So that's kind of where my whole, I need to start paying attention to the lyrics came from. And now in my 40s, it's just appreciating the music, understanding how much musicianship goes into especially Maiden and some of even these more technical bands like Dream Theater or Opeth or Russian Circles, some of these more what they call prog metal bands, and the experience, the technicality, the devotion to the music that goes into it. It's just appreciation of that.
So for me, where I grew up, and I'm going to talk about a then to now, and I still love listening to the music that played on the radio because I'm that old.
Absolutely.
When I was a kid. So I'm talking about like George Strait, Dwight Yoakam, Garth
I think
Brooks.
I really hear my wife calling me, because that is all up our. She came from Johnny Cash. She came from George Strait. You know,
well,
that is her thing.
Johnny Cash would have been like my parents' and grandparents' music, and that wasn't cool to me. I discovered that later in life as well.
Gotcha.
But like, you know, Alan Jackson, Travis Trickland, like all those like early 90s artists, like that is my wheelhouse. When I'm sitting on the back porch having a few pops, boom, that's what I'm listening to. Now imagine that guy who grew up in a very rural farming community in Arizona. That was a member of his 4-H and FFA chapter. Oh yeah, all this is probably starting to click now. And like
this all tracks.
35 years old, goes to see Disturbed for the first time, 5th row seats with a friend who hands me these little earplugs and says, "You might need these during this show." And I'm like, what the hell did I just get into? And I got to tell you, like, one of the coolest musical experiences, and I don't think this has anything to do with Freemasonry. Maybe you remember the lyrics or know more about it. But the song 10,000 Fists, like, oh my God, every time I go to fire up a running playlist.
It's music of rebellion. It's music of rebellion. It's pump up music. It is like, get your ass up and do something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember like asking my friend, like, I've never heard a bass drum like this before. How are they doing this? And he's like, oh, the double bass. Like, but it was awesome. Definitely awesome. That was probably back in like 2015 when I went to that concert, and really it changed my perspective on things.
I got to send you that Dream Theater track. I think you'd appreciate them because they're not their style is similar to Maiden, where it's very operatic singing, so it's no growling or anything like that, but the musicianship is just off the walls.
No, this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. And I want to get you back on because I know that there's so much more in the lexicon that is Metal Drew than just talking about metal or hard rock albums. So I'm putting this out there as a future invitation to come back.
I want to do one final shout out. And this I want to do, thank you for that. I want to do one final shout out to the newly raised brother, Des Fafara, if he listens to this. Dez is the lead singer of a metal band called Devil Driver, and he was also part of the new metal movement back when I was in high school for a band called Coal Chamber. He's a Mason over in California, and they just raised him, I want to say midway through last month. Because of his touring schedule, he went through the degrees, and it took some time for him to finally get his 3rd degree in, but he finally made it. He is officially a brother of the craft.
Nice. Welcome to our new brother. That's awesome. Well, worshipful brother Metal Drew, thank you so much for your time. We're going to get you back on here very soon to get into some more Masonic insight, but thank you for giving a little slice of your time and really, you know, that extra headphone, we're splitting them up on the bus and both just rocking together on our way into 7th grade.
Oh, please. If it wasn't metal music, it was George Carlin. All right. Let's just leave it at that.
Nice.